Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Mercedes have reiterated their confidence ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix and also explained that they have found the key mistake they made in their car philosophy this season that they will fix over the winter to make their car far more competitive next season. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. It really helps out the channel. Thank you very much indeed for doing that one. Also an update for their car for Austin. We'll talk about here in just a second. Let's dive straight into things. I thought this is pretty interesting to look at here from F1 charts. The entire top 10 range this season. This weekend was the first race the entire season in Singapore where Mercedes had not had a driver finish in the top 5 all year. We saw every single race. There was very few DNFs, of course, for both drivers until, of course, well, it was Russell in Silverstone and then Hamilton at Spa. But even then, one of the drivers finished in the top 5. And look at this from Red Bull. I think it's kind of remarkable to think about that at Red Bull since Bahrain with the double DNF, and of course they would have been like a top I think Verstappen was second there, and he probably would have finished that way. Every single race they've had at least one driver in the top 2, and between Verstappen and Perez have won 12 out of the last 14 races. But of course, well, 5 races to go for the rest of the season. In fairness, Aston Martin making some good progress as well over the last couple. So this big podcast comes out just a few hours ago with technical director Mike Elliott from Mercedes discussing a challenging year obviously for the team. Some key things here mentioned. Firstly, the key issue that they found with their car. This seemingly is not to do with their side pod design. Of course, a rather radical decision to get rid of the side pods. Mercedes obviously found this loophole. They decided to exploit it, hoping for a massive gain. In reality, the side pods, the no side pod compared to the big side pod design, wasn't really a major difference maker. They believe it's probably something with their floor philosophy that's been a key problem, and they've been slowly solving it as the season has progressed to get more and more competitive. But they can't fully correct it, and they will have to do that over the winter, he says. So it's pretty interesting. He says a short-term negative and effectively a long-term positive for Mercedes. This is from that race article, but of course straight from that podcast. You look at how we developed the car. I can point to one moment in time last year where we did something. I think we made a mistake. So he's saying there was specific moments where we chose one direction as opposed to another, and that was the key issue in the philosophy of the car for the entire season. What you are seeing in terms of performance and the way it swings from race to race as a consequence of that, that's a mistake we've known about for a while and something we've been correcting, and that's why our performance has gradually got better, but it's not something we can fully correct for a little while yet, and we will do that over the winter. So effectively kind of implying to me that they've got a very similar kind of concept maybe or philosophy, or they're sticking with their guns to a certain extent for next season, but have, well, apparently found the key mistake they made, which has caused their issues they've slowly corrected, but it hasn't quite got there yet. Is that to do with the floor, in particular the exposed part of it that some have mentioned, like that sticks out I think a lot further than some other car designs? Is it to do with the ride and the suspension and these issues? Like, is it really something that just affects the drag on the car? Because as he's kind of saying, right, the fact that the performance swings from race to race, like, well, it seems relatively obvious, at least from a fan perspective, the last few races, that indeed slower tracks, higher downforce circuits, Mercedes equals good, lower downforce circuits, Mercedes equals bad. I mean, it's very obvious when you look at Spa and Monza, for example, the deficit in a straight line is far from optimal, right? So maybe it's kind of in that element where the car has really been suffering this season, while in maybe the wind tunnel and in the simulations, that was not a problem, right? There was even talk at the first part of the season that this zero side pod concept was like a second quicker in the simulator than at the previous concept that they unveiled at the first part of testing back in Barcelona. Mike Elliott also went on to practically confirm that at this point, pretty much all the team's focus is on next year's car, as it will be for pretty much every single team at this point. But as he says, that the team's head and the focus is all in 2023 and trying to fight back to be back at the front. But in order to get to 2023, we need to make sure we fully understand the car. So most of the development in the factory is focused on next year, but there is still an element of trying to upgrade the current car to a certain extent so they understand as much as they possibly can about it to best inform their decisions over the winter to design their car, of course, for the new season. So that's one interesting part of it. And also just to say this, we saw a loophole in the regulations, which is what led to the side pod concept that they currently have, of course. It's a loophole we kind of go through it and think, has anyone else spotted it? Is someone else going to turn up with it? And while it looks visually very different, it's all about opening small aerodynamic advantages. It wasn't a huge game changer in the learning we found this year. It's less about the shape of the car, and it's more so to do with the way we approach the development of the car, which is where the difference lies. So obviously he doesn't want to give too much away about what part of the car might be different. We've heard a few different people from Mercedes over the last few months kind of imply that, oh, now now they understand, they've got it sorted, and then another problem occurs with the W13. So we'll see if they actually do understand it now. George Russell, we saw, just said yesterday after Singapore that he's like, look, we've gone through everything this season, we've done all the tracks, we understand pretty much everything there is to understand, and we don't think there's any more surprises with this car that are gonna, well, be thrown up in the final few races. But the W13 is built different, to be fair, than any other car we've really seen Mercedes produce in the past. And maybe part of this one final push to understand the car as much as they possibly can and make it as good as they possibly can to see which direction they should go. And of course, we saw the kind of upgrades they brought before back at Silverstone and even maybe Austria or something. There was one time where they mentioned that, wow, we brought upgrades and they did what, they were meant to do, which is a surprise to Mercedes. They were like, hang on a second, the car's responding as intended to these upgrades. That was a surprise given the way the season had gone. So whether they're bringing one final upgrade here, as it seems they are, to Austin in Kota, the race after Japan, to try and for the final 4 races just have a car that, they believe is maybe stepping one step closer to solving that big mistake that Mike Elliott there mentions. But as he says, Ferrari and Mercedes both didn't bring anything new to Asia for Singapore and upcoming in Japan, because they're both close to the budget cap and can only make minor changes. But Mercedes do still have budgeted a final upgrade in Austin. So the races go Japan, then to America, the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, then to Mexico, then to Brazil, then of course to Abu Dhabi for the finale. And talking of the final few races, thought there was some interesting statements here from the Mercedes, like race debrief they do after every weekend. James Allison is actually very confident that despite a very difficult Singapore Grand Prix weekends, their qualifying and free practice pace and long run pace should transfer over to the last few races, especially maybe with this upgrade coming in.
Singapore has traditionally been a very difficult track for this team. Not difficult in the way that we saw on Sunday, but difficult because we've struggled to show any sort of pace at that track, even in years where we've been very, very dominant in every other track. Well, this weekend we showed on Friday in free practice 1, we showed it again on qualifying, that the car was actually reasonably pacey. Not quite good enough for pole position, but definitely up there at the sharp end of the grid and able to compete. We saw on the Friday that it had very good long run pace as well and would have had a decent race in normal circumstances. So those are things that make us feel good. If we cast our mind back several races earlier in the season, well, it was a very, very different animal back then, and we've managed to progressively make it quicker through the whole year. There will be tracks ahead of us, I'm sure, which won't be as easy or won't be as strong in qualifying pace as we've seen at Singapore, at Zandvoort, at Hungary, for example. But I'm pretty confident that the pace we showed this weekend in free practice, in qualifying, that pace will carry forward to a good extent in the remaining tracks of the year. Do I think there's still a chance for the team to get its first win this season? Well, the answer to that is yes. There's been a number of occasions this year where, had things been just slightly different, that win would already be in our pockets. Now, it is the case when you're not the strongest car that those wins come slightly by serendipity. They are not won with pure brute force in the way that we've been able to in past seasons. But nevertheless, when the car is quick enough to be near the front, and with all the uncertainty that can happen in a race, then with a following wind, you can get a race win. Now, I think there have been sufficiently large number of occasions this year where we have been up the front, sort of putting ourselves in the position to benefit from that good fortune, that it's likely that at some point over the remainder of this season, something like that will fall in our favour.
And of course, as there was stated, he's also confident that in one of the races from now to the end of the season, they will get the serendipity required to get a victory. Of course, by no means guaranteed. We've thought for quite some time the victory from Mercedes has been coming, but it's not arrived quite as of yet. But in fairness, if there's one circuit that it could happen, Suzuka has been a good one for Mercedes historically, also a kind of medium-high downforce track, and Mercedes have won there every single time in the turbo hybrid era. Hamilton's won there 4 times in the last 6 times they raced there. Rosberg, Bottas back in 2019. Before that, Vettel and the like as well. As you can see, well, the only winners at Suzuka in the hybrid era go the way of Mercedes. So obviously you can't rule it out, but Verstappen, I'm sure, is going to be going all guns blazing to try and win the championship there in front of the Honda Japanese crowd, which of course would be a rather good story for Red Bull. And just to mention this as we close out the video, the fewest points scored since the summer break, Haas, Alfa Romeo, Williams Mercedes and Alpha Tauri making up those bottom 4 spots. So yes, Haas have just, I mean, like, it's kind of traditional for them, really. They just fall off a cliff after the start of the season, but really unfortunate the way it's gone, and it does make it difficult maybe for Mick Schumacher to really make his spot back in the team, when no one can seem to get points in that car right now. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.